Hey riders, Eric with Ride Adventures here. I've got a lot of background in motorcycles and riding, power sports in general, but there are other folks out there that I continue to meet that might shed light on certain topics regarding the suspension and the tires and the gear and the things that we use. I think can help you with more information than even what myself and my teammates have been able to share. So over the past year or so, I've gotten a chance to know a guy named Joe Bacal, a guy that grew up racing motocross in Indian Dunes in Southern California, went on to be a factory test driver, multi-time class champion, a Baja racer, stunt driver for the whole SAG film production and all that kind of stuff. And so a guy that's got a lot of background in not just motorcycles, but actually four-wheel vehicles as well. And collectively, again, power sports, the equipment, the drivetrains, the suspension, all the stuff that I think the more you know about it, the better it's going to make you as a rider. So I wanted to have a little interview discussion here with Joe. And Joe, go ahead and say hi.
Hey, how you doing, Eric? Thanks for having me. It's cool to be on the show here. So
good. I hope this is recorded. I hope we got it right. So as I just introduced to the crowd here, again, I want to get perspective of other professionals out there that know this equipment, because I think that, not only for reasons of repairing your own stuff if you need to, but just knowing how it works and works with your body and the weight of what we're riding and all that. I wanted to get into this sort of list of questions, and specifically starting in this first video talking with Joe about tires. You got a lot of background testing tires, I know, and so I guess I'll just ask the question so we can get it right out of the way. And which is the best tire for me, Joe?
It's going to depend on what you're going to do with the tire.
Yeah, I know. But no, I jokingly asked that question because it's one of the more common ones we see below the comments on YouTube videos and stuff like that. And, no, but more specifically, what could a rider do to become the best test pilot, so to speak, for their tires that they are trying? Like,
there's a lot that goes into that, and honestly, it depends on, first of all, you got to decide where you're going to ride your motorcycle, number one. But number two is the surfaces that you're going to be on, and maybe you don't even know because you're going all over the world like you guys do. But at the end of the day, you have to be comfortable in all these situations and surfaces, and that obviously your tire is the one that's touching the ground. So some people like a lot of different brands, like that are they're brand loyal. Right. Yeah. But it also depends on, horsepower. It depends on, the type of weight you're going to put on the vehicle. It just compounds. There's a lot. We could talk about tires for days. A lot of it's just preference. And obviously people do a lot of research, which I highly recommend. Just because there's a tire that fits best for you or myself doesn't mean it's going to be the right choice for someone else.
But then also we said sort of things you could do to like experiment with tire pressures. Like, obviously a tire tested at this 35 PSI or whatever is not going to behave the same as it does at 29 or something like that.
Yeah, really, when it comes to tire pressure, and I've done a lot of different tire pressure testing on the test track and off-road and everything, you really want to stay sort of close to spec, right? Which the manufacturer specification, there's a reason that specification is on that motorcycle, because that tire was developed for that motorcycle. So it's really important, but you can go up and down a little bit. You can play around with it, especially if you're adding weight. You want to go up a little bit. If you're different terrains, especially on the rock side, you could drop it a little bit, but you have to be careful because you don't want pinch flats, for number one. Your handling could change. Your grip's going to change. A lot of people may play around with it, but I wouldn't go too much from a high and low standpoint. 5 PSI is probably where I would play around with on the upper and lower side.
Yeah, I think you mean 5 PSI, possibly on like a single cylinder dirt bike, certainly not on an adventure bike. I think we're usually in the teens and PSI up there, but yeah, don't go too low. Start in the middle and work your way out and see what the limits are. Anything else you can think of for how to be the best test pilot if someone's going to go out and say they're not sure which tire they want to take on their next big trip?
We can talk a little bit about evaluation, Eric. I think not everyone's a test rider, right? But what you can do is you can document what you're doing. So you start with this tire pressure and you can run a different loop. Maybe you have a loop around where you live, on pavement and off pavement. When you're riding your motorcycle, try to really focus on the tire itself. Don't change your suspensions settings every time. It's like, remember we talked about one variable is super important when you do any changes at all, but you should always leave everything the same if you're actually going to change from one tire spec to another, because the only variable that changes is the tire.
As hard as it might be able to do to repeat an exact ride or a loop around your house or whatever, the temperature is always going to be a little different, all those things. Yeah, of course, consistency like that would be a good benchmark, I guess you could say. Do aggressive or knobby type tires really make a difference? was one of the questions we see from riders who bought their bike that probably came with like an 80/20 tire. And they're all trying to wonder, do I really need to get something more aggressive?
Those type of tires 100% make a difference in the right terrain, right? In this right surface. They're very focused in kind of more one or two areas versus being more of a 50/50 type of tire or something, whatever. I mean, so at the end of the day, a knobby type tire is ideal in your type of maybe mud or some rock, where the terrain is just, you need that extra knobby to get you to bite that micro and macro type of keying that moves you forward. Instead, you want the least amount of slip, right? You want that grip, especially this knobby tires really, really are important on the front, especially when you're kind of doing a little bit of single track where it's maybe off camber, things like that, where it could be a little bit slippery. You want that bite. So when you're riding your motorcycle and you're trying to hold that line, if you have maybe a 50/50 type of tire, it's just going to slide. It's just, you're not going to have that bite, that edge on the side where you would with maybe a knobby tire. So there's absolutely benefits to the knobby tire, but there's also areas where you don't want a really aggressive knobby tire. One is on the pavement. Well, first of all, you can hear it, right? It gets noisy. Second of all, that after a while, you'll get a drone sound. There's certain frequencies that'll hit. You'll get a little drone, but fatigue will set in after a while. Also, when it comes to just grip, right? Lateral grip, obviously 4.5 type of braking grip with knobby tires. I mean, they're just not going to stop as well. You're not going to have that type of grip that you would have with more of a street or 50/50 type of tire.
This question though about, do I need a knobby tire or whatever? I guess it's always been a little frustrating when a rider says that they can't do, or they think that they can't do a certain ride or do our training program based on the tire that they have. It's like that word "can't" is rarely the situation. I think a lot of tires can apply and be used in a lot of situations. Of course, there are better patterns and pressures and all that for some situations, but I just don't like it when a rider says, no, sorry, I can't do that with you guys.
It might be the placebo effect a little bit. I think people feel better with a knobby tire when they're in the dirt. And I'm sure, obviously, most cases it's going to be better for sure. But what'll make you a better rider is if you don't have a knobby tire in the dirt. I mean, you're just going to be a better rider because you've got to really focus. You've got to work a little harder. You've got to really pick the best lines. But actually, I think that'll actually make you a better rider because you're not having to depend on that knobby to get, what I'm saying? It's kind of an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, sort of like demanding of yourself that you learn to feel and apply pressure the right ways because you got less traction. Yeah. Another question we had was how to determine the difference between a hard compound and a stiff sidewall versus soft and soft sidewalls. Like, how can a rider know for themselves if they're walking through the motorcycle shop trying to decide, is this one too soft for me? Is this one just right? Too hard?
You're not going to be able to see that from a static side. I mean, unless you have a durometer, you're checking durometer at the shop. That's still not going to really answer a lot of your questions. I think going on a website, like if you're going to, let's say Dunlop, I'll use Dunlop as an example. There's no affiliation, but let's say you're looking at a tire and you look at the specs. You can pull out some information from a website. I think the websites are pretty helpful, just to kind of determine, again, how are you planning on using this motorcycle? Is this tire maybe better for maybe a little extra weight from a luggage standpoint where you get less deflection, you have a stiffer sidewall? These things matter. You can definitely feel it when you're riding, but from a static standpoint, I think most people would have a hard time looking at a tire and going, this has a stiffer sidewall versus softer. You're pretty much not going to be able to tell by looking at it, in my opinion. But as soon as you start riding it, and then let me just break down a little bit what you'd experience. Let's say you're riding your motorcycle, you've got a lot of weight on, just your luggage, your bags, whatever. You're going through some corners, maybe your tire pressure could be even down a little bit, whatever. But at the end of the day, if you notice a front and rear mismatch, or you start to get, we call it that squirm feel in the rear, especially in the rear. And what's happening is that tire's actually deflecting. It's actually, the rim is obviously stationary, but the tire's actually going a little, just starting to just deflect right to left as you're turning these corners.
As it would be centered on the rim. It's starting to kind of pudge off to one side a little bit.
Yeah, if you think about it, if you aired it way down, it's easier to visualize it. You have this weight, so the tire's going to try to stay in its position, but it's because it's having to deflect because of the lateral forces, right? That
moment of deflection, I know I've felt for sure. Yeah, with too low pressure, but also the sudden front flat tire or a flat rear. If it goes really, really low, that's ultimately what happens is you're trying to keep the bike upright. You got a flat front tire and it deflects off to one side or the other and becomes a challenge to keep a bike upright that way.
That's extreme, but it's still a similar similar feel. Like that's kind of what it starts to feel like. But it's going to be very, on a motorcycle especially, it's going to be hard to pick up. But you're going to notice like why does something feel off? And also, if you think about the way the hysteresis, it builds, and it kind of, I'd say it doesn't snap, but it comes back to its, back to center, and that actually will change the balance and kind of change the way your motorcycle feels as it comes back.
But then in general, I think everybody knows that when we talk about the softness or the firmness of a compound, the general rule is the harder the compound, the longer it's going to last. And probably the little less grippy or sticky it's going to be. Softer means it's going to wear out a little faster. It just breaks down the rubber faster when it's soft. And the plus side, though, is that it's going to be nice and grippy.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, Eric, if someone's deciding on what tire to pick for a long adventure, I would tend to go a little more, not super aggressive, but just something that works really decently in every area, right? What tire can you use in any condition, especially if you're going on a long 10, 12 day, adventure around wherever you're decided to go, but you just don't know what you're going to run into. And that's the biggest problem.
Okay. Another question coming in. How does added weight, being your luggage or another ride or whatever, how does that affect the feel of the bike back to that tire deflection standpoint?
When it comes to adding, different, obviously, hard bags, you start to really put a lot of weight on your motorcycle. Some of the things that you're going to notice, especially if you have an aggressive tire, well, it's going to start to get noisier. You're putting more pressure on those tread blocks. Also, when you put extra weight on your motorcycle, your ride comfort's going to change. I don't care if you have a knobby or you have more of a 50-50 type of street type of tire, you're still going to feel the cracks in the road. You're going to start to feel some of that because that extra weight. I mean, you have more pressure on that tire because obviously everything is just heavier. Your suspension's going to go ahead and absorb and dampen a lot of that, but you're going to go, wow, my things feel firm or have more of an edge to it. And that a lot of that just comes to just more weight on the tire.
Increasing pressure to avoid too much deflection.
And that's kind of something I would absolutely do. I wouldn't put a bunch more pressure in it, but I would absolutely increase it, especially if you're adding weight. A lot of times there's some pretty good specifications in your manuals that will talk about that. It's obviously really hard to ride a bike with a lot of weight in sandy conditions, like that's a no brainer for sure. Obviously, if you're in an off camber situation and you're maybe in the mountains and there's an off camber road that you're riding on, you have to consider the weight because the weight's going to pull you down. Gravity's going to drag you to the side that's on the negative.
The question is, and I had not quite heard the term before, straight line stability. What is it, and how do you consider it when evaluating tires?
So when you're evaluating, you're going down the highway and you're looking at two different factors. There's controllability and sensitivity. Controllability is how much control does it take when you're riding your motorcycle to keep the motorcycle going straight from a control standpoint? How much input on your handlebar are you putting into that? That's the control side. From a sensitivity standpoint, how sensitive is the motorcycle going straight from road undulations, rain groove, even crosswind? All those are factors when it comes to sensitivity. Believe it or not, tires play a huge role in this. You wouldn't maybe think so, but they do. There's some tires that will follow the rain groove, right? They just tend to follow, depending on the tread and the pattern, it will follow that rain groove on a freeway, and you're constantly trying to. You have small inputs from a controllability standpoint, small inputs to keep that motorcycle to go straight because it's sensitive to that rain groove, right?
Sorry, when you say rain groove?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Rain groove is the cuts in a freeway that you see, the small cuts that's supposed to help with rain and basically getting more.
Okay.
I didn't mention that. And then also just undulations from even just off camber situations, maybe some not really potholes, but just surface changes, patches, maybe an aggressive type of asphalt versus smooth. There's just different types of road undulations and surfaces that you're going to go over. And believe it or not, again, how much control does it take to keep that motorcycle to go straight? How sensitive is that tire on these surfaces?
Any kind of deflection, I'm going to say, is adding up to fatigue in the core of the body.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's deflection, Eric. I think it's more of just the tread patterning itself, just moving, like I said, these small little undulations, these small little bumps or cracks or divots or whatever. Even just every road has the road cant for water drainage. So there's just certain things that tires tend to be sensitive to. A really good tire is going to go straight, and the controllability is going to be zero, right?
When purchasing or selecting a tire, what factors should a rider consider?
When you go with the OEM tire, right? That OEM tire is designed and developed for that motorcycle during the prototype stages. That is the best tire that they tuned from a braking standpoint, from a handling standpoint, from a durability, all the different things that go into play. Usually most manufacturers have one or two, they usually have two different suppliers, but both those suppliers have to meet the targets for that OEM, when it comes to the tuning and the targets that they're trying to hit. But what I'm getting at is it's okay to purchase the OEM factory tire, right? People tend to go with aftermarket tires because number one, they do help you in certain areas, right? If you're going in the mud, obviously you want a more aggressive tire. There's no question that the tires work. Some aftermarket tires are going to work better, but here's the key factor is you don't always know if it's going to get worse from a braking standpoint. You don't know if your ride comfort's going to change, if you're going to get that frequency, vibration, noise, drone, whatever. So just by putting on an aftermarket tire, I would say you're gambling a little bit. A lot of these motorcycle manufacturers, they don't test all these aftermarket tires. They don't. So they don't really know how they're going to react, and neither do you. So keep that in mind. Again, do your research, but the OEM tire tends to be usually the best tire for the application.
Okay, another question. Can a YouTube reviewer help you decide on what tire to purchase with just a static evaluation?
No. I would say no. I think you can get some information out of it. You're absolutely going to get some of the specifications that the manufacturer's explaining. Hey, this is why this tire works. That information is coming right off the internet or something like that. I mean, the engineers are giving you that information, or the marketing is giving you that information. But until you actually mount the tire and test it, I think you can only get so much information from that type of review. I look at different tire reviews, and some of these guys and girls are really good at explaining the specifications and kind of how this tire is different than this tire. And some actually have the experience, and they've tested it, and they've ridden it, and they know. But I guess just from my standpoint, I need more information. I need to actually feel it. I need to test it. I need to get that information versus just a static review.
All right. Some riders have asked, how to identify when you should replace your tires?
A lot of it's going to be visual for sure. Is the tire starting to break down, right? I mean, your tread blocks are starting to wear. Look at your wear markers. That wear marker that the wear bar is what they call it. As you start to get to that wear bar or past that wear bar, that's your indication. That manufacturer's telling you it's time to replace that tire when you get to that wear bar. Also, if you store your motorcycle outside in different types of weather, from Arizona summers to Alaska winters. I mean, who knows? But tire rubber compounds really start to change from temperature, and they don't always come back, the next season. They may get hard and stay hard. It's kind of interesting. A new tire is obviously, the best tire, but as the seasons start to, as you have that tire on your motorcycle for more than a year or two, the seasons start to change that compound and it starts to break down that rubber. That's when you see tires getting hard, right? And they don't ever kind of come back. It just seems like it's a harder tire. Your ride comfort starts to change. Your handling, your grip isn't seem to be the same. Those are indications that you probably need to replace your tire.
Yeah, as the compound changes, riders might not consider that it is just from heating up and cooling down, like a lot of materials, it will become closer to brittle and not as soft as it originally was. So
look at your tires. Look for any tears, marks. If you're in the rocks, and especially in some shale or sharper rocks, I mean, you're going to get some sidewall cuts and things like that. Any type of visual cut or tear or something, you should just replace it. There's too much on the line.
Okay, what do you think about Chinese brand tires? Are they, like, a lot of people like the price of them. People would rather not buy stuff from China. What do you think? Is there an overall way of saying, are they good, bad?
I think they're better than they used to be. That right off the bat is they've improved. My experience with Chinese tires hasn't been a good experience. They break down. They don't last. The compounds, for some reason, compared to the Japanese or your Michelins, I mean, they just seem to be different. And I've noticed it, especially on the car side, more obviously than the motorcycle side, but they're not as refined. I feel like they're just a cheaper tire, and you can just tell when you're using them. So not my favorite. Yeah, I know the cost is there, but you get what you pay for, right?
Yeah, and if they're not performing, there could be other things that you're spending money on. The cost of not having a good tire could be that now you're buying motorcycle parts because you had a crash or a little slip or something, or a failure in a carcass or something like that. Well, no offense, China. We still love you and everything like that, but Good to see they're making some motorcycles though. When I saw you at the AIM Expo, and I think you took video of me sitting on the Kobe, the Chinese bike, and
For sure.
hearing good things about that stuff. One more question from viewers. What are your thoughts on mismatching tires, as in different brand and model, front and rear? If a rider's in a position where they only have one option, or maybe they feel like they want to deliberately mismatch.
I think there's pros and cons. I think a lot of people do it, especially on the enduro side. That, you know, the single track guys will put trial tires on the back of the tire to get more bite. I mean, it absolutely works in those conditions. I think you're going to notice it the most on the pavement. You might get that imbalanced feel. It just may not feel like your bike's working the way it's supposed to, because you have two different types of tread designs. Sometimes you can feel it, sometimes you can't. I think it's just going to depend on the situation. And if you have to do it because that's all you have, well, then that's okay. Like it
is what it is. Yeah,
it is. But if you have a choice, I would say probably try to not do that. Just because the tires, when they're developed, even on the aftermarket side, are developed together, right? So they're doing their leaning into the corners at speed. They're doing their braking. They're doing the acceleration testing. They're doing all that type of development with the front and rear, with a matched tread design and compounds and everything. When you start to change that, again, the unknown happens, right? We don't really know how that's going to react. Just like when you put an aftermarket tire on a motorcycle, you don't really know what you're going to gain and you have a pretty good idea what you're going to gain, but you don't know what you're going to lose. So I would say it works for some. Not ideal, but I would say it just depends on it comes down to what you want. And if you like it, then go with it.
Yeah. I think you said it clear too, that the pavement is the best opportunity to feel that difference between two. If you have a pure pavement dedicated tire on the front, for the example, and an aggressive dirt tire on the rear, to me, the front end's going to want to turn. It's going to want to dive and want to go where you want to go. But that rear end is going to feel particularly sloshy, I think.
100% subjective. Some people, it works for some, and it may not work for others. I just would say if you don't have to, then I would.
Okay, final question from the viewers. How important is it to balance your tires?
Well, I think it's really important. I mean, first of all, you're going to get a really nice, smooth motorcycle, right? You're not going to get the shakes and the vibrations coming from an imbalanced front or rear tire. Also, just overall run out, you're going to get better wear overall, right? You're going to get the uniformity is going to be better. That's when you start getting the cupping and you start getting some changes in tire wear, is when you don't have a well-balanced tire. It'll help with fatigue over time. If your tires are imbalanced, again, the shake, the frequencies come in, it starts to wear, bolts start to get loose. I mean, things start to happen because you're not on a smooth plane, right? You're fighting these different frequencies and different vibrations coming out of the tire itself. There's a lot of factors that go into play, but there's a reason people balance car tires, and there's a reason people balance motorcycle tires, and that it's just the way to go.
It's not just for the sake of the tires, for the sake of the fatigue of the rider too. It's just,
But honestly, to change that a little bit. So when I raced down in Baja in the trucks, I didn't balance my tires. Or my wheels. It didn't matter. You didn't notice it in the dirt as much. So there's things like that. I mean, if you're in the dirt the whole time, probably won't notice it. But as soon as you touch on that pavement, you're going to notice it.
Take the time and get it right and tight. So, all right. Well, thanks for walking through some of this stuff again. To those of you watching, this was just an attempt to walk through some questions that we see below the comments in our videos. We've done tire reviews, and you've heard of these things from my perspective before, but I wanted to have a guy like Joe, your incredibly deep background in tire testing, here to explain some things, and hopefully people learn from it and make better decisions and stay upright and see more of this world.
I appreciate the time, and if I can help anyone out there that just wants a little more information, then that's great.
Well, thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks, Joe, for joining me, and see you in the next video.